Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Roberts as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Roberts, CEO of Collaborative Compositions. And today I've got with us Robert Jones, Principal Advisor with Corvata. Robert, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Robert Jones. The company is Corvata. We do enterprise and exit readiness for government contractors.
We were in Albuquerque just a couple of weeks ago, and we had a similar conversation, and I was absolutely enthralled with all of the content that you were providing. So I think this is going to be a great conversation for folks to hear from, to learn from, and to listen to. First question that I'm just got off the top of my head, in terms of exit planning, does anybody ever actually plan for the exit when they start?
I think one of the questions people should be asking soon after you start the business is like, how are you going to get out? What is your plan? And I think people maybe don't think about that because most relationships, we don't start saying, how am I going to get out of this relationship? Maybe that mentality carries over to business. But yeah, it's like you got to think that you're going to exit your business. And that's scary for people to think about and hear, right? And maybe it sounds negative, but it is the truth. You will exit your business. The goal in my work and for a lot of people in my field is that you exit the business on your terms, in your timing, and hopefully at the price and the value that you want. If those three things happen, then my work with you has been successful.
Who doesn't want to make a bunch of money after they leave their company and be able to retire and enjoy the rest of their lives, right? So in these situations in which you get engaged with companies, what are some of the biggest things that you find that folks are unprepared for, or they have thought of, or they just need to give some more consideration to?
So the first that I would say is that when you start talking about exit planning, people immediately begin to think of M&A, PE, private equity, something like that. And certainly in the broader exit planning world, those are pieces of the puzzle. What I like to say is that if you're talking to an M&A advisor, an investment banker, it's likely that you're really far right in the timeline, meaning that you're at the transaction or you've got the transaction lined up and that's where you're focused. And unfortunately, at that point, the value of the business is what it is. There's no runway left to change the value of the business. My work is much farther left in the timeline, ideally 2 to 5 years before you even think about a transaction, because over here, farther left in the timeline is where we have that opportunity to impact, right? We can address policies, procedures, the operations of the business that affect not only the short-term profitability, but actually help you build a business that has value over time. It also gives us an opportunity to untangle the business from the business owner. So I think that's the other thing that maybe people don't think about in this process is you start a business. Oftentimes it's just you, or maybe it's you and a family member or you and a business partner, and then it grows however fast and however much. But oftentimes those one or two people that are the owners, everything runs through them. And that becomes a problem, right? Because everything runs through them.
Yeah.
The business doesn't really operate on its own. And you got to begin to think differently about that process.
And you mentioned something that is always interesting to me, and it's processes, operations, policy. How do you find that those are holding companies back? And where do you feel like there's consistent challenges that you encounter when engaging with companies on the process and operation sides of things?
So for me, that actually fits in well with the intellectual property that I've developed. And so I've created a system called the Enterprise Readiness Operating Model. And that model has 3 legs. One is structure, the second is discipline, and the third is decision flow. And I think all of those address the question that you just asked. And that is, the structure is what I say are the policies, the procedures, the insurance policies, your management agreement, the bylaws, whatever that is in the organization. It's what are the basic documents that guide what we do. The second layer of discipline is, do we actually use it? do we pull the policies and procedures off the shelf, or is it something that we wrote once and we put up, and if I go up there and get it, I'm going to sneeze because I'm going to be covered in dust when it comes down off the shelf, right? And we know that's what happens a lot of times. So it's, do we actually use the documents? Have they been reviewed? Have they been updated? So maybe you have a buy-sell agreement that you wrote with a business partner, but if you wrote that buy-sell agreement 10 years ago and it hasn't been reviewed or updated since then, it may put you and or your business partner in a situation that you didn't intend, because that document that was written 10 years ago doesn't reflect the current operations and structure of the business. And then another part of the discipline layer is do we actually have the document? Is it readily available? Do we have evidence of using our policies and procedures? Because when you get to the transaction, you're going to go through due diligence. We have to answer some questions and provide some documents. It tends to be very intense, very grueling. Even for relatively small companies, that process can take many weeks. It can involve a couple of hundred documents or more. It's not a simple process. And that's where we see a lot of transactions either get stalled or sometimes completely fall apart, is because they can't pull together all of the documentation and information that's requested. And then that third layer of my approach is that decision flow. And it's how judgment and work actually flows through the organization. So we look at who has the authority to make the decisions. How do we document and communicate the decisions? How do we follow up on those decisions? You and I both know what we see, and what I talk about with clients are the 7 decision failure modes. And that is things like, the decision doesn't get made. How many times have we been in multiple meetings about the same thing, right? And the decision still doesn't get made. And that kind of ties in with the next, which is the decision gets delayed, right? We just keep pushing it out, either maybe hoping we don't have to make the decision, or maybe hoping somebody else is going to make the decision. Sometimes people are caught in analysis paralysis, right? They're waiting for every possible piece of information. And many times we have to realize that we can make the decision without 100% of the information. And maybe sometimes we just need to, because of timing, that we need to learn to accept that maybe 50% of the information is okay, but certainly 70 to 80% of the information is okay. And waiting for that additional 20 to 30% is oftentimes unlikely to change the decision that we would make, right?
Right.
Other things we see are that the decision doesn't get documented. It doesn't get communicated to people, or somewhere along the way, somebody slams it in reverse and we don't really know why. And one of the stories that I shared with you was, that's exactly what I saw happen many times. When an organization wanted to move me into a role, and I said, I'm interested in that, but if I'm going to do that, I need to make sure that everybody's in agreement, that we all understand what the decision is, that we're documenting it, that we're communicating it, because otherwise my job is going to be difficult to execute. I'm going to be out here communicating with people, and they're not going to have any understanding of what was decided and why. And that's where I saw it fall apart.
I have personally experienced, I think, all of those decision flow issues and challenges in my personal life, in my business life, throughout every sort of engagement, and throughout working with government and working with big companies. All of these companies, all of these agencies, everybody has some sort of problem or challenge with making those decisions effectively, and then making sure that those decisions are communicated effectively so that everybody understands what's going on and why. Doesn't matter if it's personal or professional, decision making is, I think, a challenge. And I personally believe there's ways to help people make better decisions with less data and make decisions that they are comfortable sticking with. But I'm curious, in your work, how do you find those situations, and how do you resolve the decision making roadblocks or gaps that you come across in companies?
I think that people sometimes expect that me or somebody else is going to come in and say, here's this wonderful little tool. If you just follow these, that doesn't exist. And it's also not my approach, because what I find is I could sell you that little tool. I could even come in and train you how to use that little tool. But what's going to happen to it? Same thing is going to happen to a lot of the policies and procedures, right? You're going to pay me some money. Maybe you're going to think I did a good job, and that's going to get put on the shelf. And then 6 months or however sometime down the road, you guys are going to forget about it and you're going to go right back into the way you were doing it. So it's a behavioral thing, right? This is a coaching and accountability. And so for me, it's having regular meetings. So I work with owners and executives in the organization. It's about having regular meetings. And it's less about project management per se. Obviously, there are some project types of things that we're doing. And so it's not a status update. It's a what decision needs to get made and why aren't we making the decision? And I tell people, I can give you my opinion of what I think the decision is, but it's your decision to make. If you're the owner of your business, it's your decision to make. I'm happy to be, I can be a sounding board. I can even go try to find some resources and information to help you, but it's your decision to make. And then what I'm going to do is say, okay, Chelsea, you've got 6 or 10 or 20 people, whatever it is on your team. Did you write it down? Did you actually write down the decision? Did you communicate it to everybody? Now, let me pause there and say writing it down doesn't necessarily mean that it's a board resolution. Sometimes it's a simple decision and writing it down is putting it in an email. And that's okay. Then we've got evidence of this is the decision we made. And the communicating it, I say communicate to everyone, put a little asterisk there, right? Communicate it to everyone that it's relevant. There are some decisions in your business that are going to apply to everybody in the business. And you need to communicate it in writing, verbally and otherwise as well, but you need to communicate it to everybody in the business. There are obviously some decisions that are going to affect people in finance or people in marketing. Make sure those teams get that information. And then the other piece is accountability, right? So it's following up and saying, okay, we made the decision. Now, director of marketing, it's your responsibility to execute it. Now I follow up and hold that person accountable that they're executing what they're supposed to be doing.
And it sounds like there's situations in which a company might be trying to sell, trying to exit, trying to have their situation come to be that they can get out with a little bit of money. And how often do you find that the companies that are buying or organizations that are interested in engaging with that company once it's exited, how often are they discovering that there's very little decision traceability, we'll say?
A lot of this is going to show up in due diligence, right? Because that's when we like to say you're going to be looking at all of this information, right? Early on, it's buying a house, right? You can go to the open house and it's all clean and pretty, right? They've staged it and it's all wonderful. And then there's the home inspection day, right? That's the guy who comes and he crawls through the attic and through the floor. And that's when we find all of those things. And the due diligence of a business transaction is exactly that. It's somebody coming and digging through all of that. And that's where we find somebody will say, oh yeah, we agreed to do that. And that agreement is maybe a board level decision, right? And there should have been a resolution. And that means that there should be a written resolution and there should be meeting minutes that document that the board met on this day and these people were there and that resolution was adopted. And what we see happen, those things just magically get created in the middle of due diligence because they never existed before. I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm just saying that's what happens. And that's evident in a couple of ways, because if you were doing the right thing and you were documenting this stuff, then when it comes to due diligence, you should be able to readily and quickly produce that document. And so as we're in due diligence, we see, hey, of this list of whatever it is, 50 or 200 items, we've got several of these that we're still waiting on. Why are we waiting? That thing you said happened 5 years ago. Why can't we get it? Because nobody can find the document. And this is something that I see. So that's one way that we see it pop up. The other that we see, and it comes through interviews and stuff. So I had a client a couple of years ago, by all hallmarks of looking at the business, a successful business. They had grown. They were actually right on the edge and growing out of their SBA size standard. They were profitable. They actually had a lot of money in the bank for a business their size. They were doing very smart with cash flow. And they were growing. They were winning new contracts. They were hiring new employees, honestly, faster than they knew what to do with. And one day they showed up and said, yeah, we think we want to sell. And I said, great. So let's talk about the types of things. All of a sudden, they went out on their own and started talking to an M&A person. They got excited because somebody said, hey, we think your business might be worth X dollars, right? And they went, oh, cha-ching, cha-ching. Things quickly progressed towards a letter of intent and then towards moving into due diligence. And that's when the buyers realized, hey, wait a minute, you're a $50 million company. At the time, I think that they were in the 600-ish employees range and winning new contracts, actually had a pretty decent backlog. But they realized that literally everything ran through the two owners. Every decision, every check writing, every approval ran through the two owners. A $50 million company with 600 employees, and everything ran through two owners. And the buyers went, time out. How is this business going to run when we buy it? Because you're going to be out soon, right? Yeah, you're going to stick around for a little while, but if the structure of the business and the management below the owners isn't there, then how is the business going to operate when the owners are gone?
I've also experienced a similar situation, and I found that the company has the policies, they've got the processes, they've got the things that people should be doing and following, but I think it was all for show, maybe. And it turned out that all of those decisions were going through the two owners of this company, and there was just no way for that company to continue to do the things it was doing if those two people had left. But in my mind, the policies and the documentation was there. So is that policy and documentation a replacement for the new ownership? And can it effectively be executed and implemented at that time of sale? And is that not really quite the replacement for decision making that's been siloed up at the top? Does it make sense that from a company perspective to have all this stuff in place and then effectively just think when we get to the point where we're going to sell, then we'll start using these things and implementing the actual stuff that matters?
So I think there's a few things in the answer to your questions. And one is sometimes the policies and procedures just don't exist, certainly not in written form. If a company's been in business for a while, are there practices that they probably consistently follow? Yes. Are they written and documented? Maybe not. And again, we oftentimes find that a lot of those are not. So that in itself is a problem. Even if they are written and documented, then sometimes that's because either they went through some type of audit and maybe they did something, maybe they bought some templates from somebody and said, okay, well, here we've got them. They get through that audit or whatever that is. And again, they get shoved on the shelf. They were never really adopted and brought into the business. Another factor that happens many times is that management changes over time, right? So the manager of accounting, the manager of engineering, whatever, right? People come and go. Some people stay, but there's a lot of come and go in businesses. And what happens? One, the knowledge that person had about your business just walked out the door. And then the person who came in brought their own habits with them, good and bad, right? We'll often find that, hey, they brought some good knowledge and they brought some good habits, but oftentimes they bring some bad habits. Also, oftentimes we find, and again, you and I have probably lived this on both sides, is that somebody gets hired and they don't really get trained, right? We don't put them through a rigid process. We don't bring down the policies and procedures and go through our process and policies with that new hire to make sure that they understand it. And then the other is that the reality is that business owners, many times, and I'm guilty of this, I get it, it's my mentality. Many of us are type A. We can be control freaks. We can be perfectionists. And many times we have difficulty delegating. Can't say I'm perfect about it. I've learned and I've gotten better about saying, okay, I've hired you to do marketing. Here's what I want you to do. I try to be more outcome focused on that, right? And say, this is what I want. How you get there, obviously, as long as it's legal and moral and stuff, right? But your approach to get there, I've got to step back and say, I'm hired you as a professional to do that. But that is also, okay, like, have we empowered those people? And that empowerment can come in the form of written direction. It can come in the form of actions. As businesses grow, one of the things you need with your policies and procedures is a delegation of authority. Who has the authority to do certain types of transactions and at certain dollar values? Do you have written policies and procedures for marketing? Who's in charge of marketing? What are their roles and what are they responsible for? Because if that stuff is documented, then again, it makes it a lot easier. It doesn't solve the problems because again, you could still have somebody at the very top. You could have written policies and procedures, but if you've got a control freak at the top of the organization who won't let other people make decisions, then even if you've given me a policy and a title that says I should otherwise be able to make it, what happens? I end up deferring up the chain. And that becomes problematic, right? Because then now there's another layer involved. That means the decisions are getting delayed. And ultimately, from the buyer's perspective of your business, then it's okay, how is this business going to run if one or two people are doing all the work and making all the decisions?
And I think that ties really cleanly into the concept of corporate knowledge and having the corporate memory. And I find oftentimes that individuals are the keepers of that knowledge and that memory. And I can't really think of a time where there's just been an exercise that says, okay, we want to capture, we love the way you're doing it, not the way that we thought we would do it, not the way that we have it documented that we would do it, but we love the way you're doing it. When are we going to sit down and have the conversation about, can you document that? Can you put that into place as a policy or as some sort of guidance documentation so that we can continue to do it that way and we can bring other people in and they can do it that way as well? I find oftentimes it's very difficult for companies to try to figure out how to retain and build corporate knowledge and corporate memory. And I would think the only ways is to document it, to get it written down and have a point in time in which you say that, okay, things are working, things are growing, things are going well. Do the policy, do the process. Does the documentation match what we're actually doing that is working? Do you do that exercise with companies? Do you ever suggest that they take a breather, stop for a second, look at the situation from a 50,000 foot view and say, this is working really well. It's not documented. We should figure that out. We should get it documented. Is that a thing that you go through?
Not only of having policies and procedures, but detailed work instructions. Some people call them desktop guides, right? So your policy is what we do and why we do it. Your procedure is how we do it, but that doesn't necessarily address which software or anything like that. It's just that this is how we're going to execute that type of thing. Then separately, you have those work instructions, but it's if the payroll person got hit by a bus, does somebody else have a login? Do we have an actual side-by-side with screenshots? Go here, click this. Don't forget, you got to come over here to this third screen and check this third box. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's those little things, right? That, to your point, that's the stuff that makes it difficult. An example that I can give that I think addresses part of your question, I'm working with a client right now that somewhat surprising to me. I started working with them on this in 2025, so not that long ago. We're still almost 100% paper oriented, like paper expense, pay for this. And I'm working with them now to a degree. You can say it is documented, but when it's in a paper folder in a metal filing cabinet, how easy is it to get that information? It's not, right?
Yeah.
And so we're working on getting them to digitize more stuff and use SharePoint. So now if we've got digital documents with all of the tools, with AI, with whatever tool set you're using, it's much easier to search and find that information. So that's one thing, right? Tied with that, I'm also getting them to use Microsoft Planner. And this is not a Microsoft pitch per se, because I could care less arguably about which tool you use. This business happens to be Microsoft, and obviously a lot of us are Microsoft-oriented businesses. But if you're paying for Microsoft 365, which many businesses are, you have SharePoint. You have Microsoft Forms, you have Planner, you have Microsoft Lists, you have other tools that you're already paying for. So there's no need to go bloat your tech stack, which is a whole other problem. Take advantage of what you have. And again, get that stuff out of people's brains. You and I probably have been in many client offices where people are walking around with their paper notebook. And it's great that they're taking notes, but those notes are here and here. So why aren't we using OneNote? Why do we have to-do lists in a written piece of paper instead of using Microsoft Planner, where I can have a plan set up for my group, for my department, and I can assign that. And now I can see who's been assigned that task. I can see what the due date is. We can attach documents. We can attach links, right? So this company, as I'm showing this, their eyes are going, oh my gosh, we never thought about that. We didn't realize it. And I'm showing them, hey, if you set up Microsoft Planner, one, you get this stuff out of here. I said, you at your level, now when you have that daily or weekly huddle with somebody, you go into Microsoft Planner, sort and filter by that person and by the stuff that's due immediately. And now in that daily huddle, you can see what they're supposed to be working on and agree with them. Hey, you've got these 3 tasks. Do you need something from me today to get that done?
Wow.
And then the same thing for the next higher up, right? So the owners of the company can also now hold management accountable because they can go in and do the same thing. I can go say, hey, Chelsea, you're the director of marketing. When I'm having my one-on-one with you this week, we're going to pull up that planner and we're going to see what's assigned to you. And I'm going to do the exact same thing to you that you should be doing to the people underneath you. So now you see you've got, not only do you have accountability, but you have a tool to help implement and hold people accountable in the process.
Thank you, first of all, for walking me through that, because that was very informative. And I think that there's so few people that really actually just understand that if you start using the tools that you probably already have effectively, that you can make such a big difference in so many changes that will be beneficial and advantageous to you as you're growing and starting to plan for an exit. Now, I'm curious, what kind of size jump and what kind of value growth do you see when you're working with companies by implementing these things, by changing these things, by improving their business? How much more value are they able to get out of it when they do decide to sell?
I can tell you, but certainly from a profitability perspective. So my background is I'm a CPA, I'm an accountant. In this role, I do look at the broader business, but I have that expertise. Also, what I tell people, it all comes back to the balance sheet and the income statement in one way or another. Every decision you make, everything you do, eventually flows through the balance sheet and the income statement. So in this case of this client who has everything paper, part of what they're struggling with is some growth, and they're going, okay, we've got this new work coming, but our processes are slow. And they're worried, like, we're going to have to hire more people. I'm like, you don't need to hire more people. You need to be working smarter and more efficiently. And if you do that, your department can actually do more work, and they see that and they agree that, or they're like, oh yeah, if it didn't take me 12 hours to process payroll every 2 weeks, because we're doing all of this stuff manually, and I could get payroll from 12 hours down to 2 or 3 hours. Well, guess what? There's another 9 or 10 hours every 2 weeks that you could be applying to something else, right? And some of that is somewhat easy to quantify. Some of it is a little more difficult. But you can see that over time that obviously, hey, wait a minute, we brought on all this new work. So we drove direct cost, we drove revenue without necessarily having to hire people, without necessarily having to buy new software. Because again, in the case of Microsoft or Google or Zoho or whichever platform you might be using, you're probably just not taking advantage of what you're already paying for. So that's one way. But then obviously the other is that as you pick on operations, we did this with a client a while back. If you tighten up operations, then you can do things like having less rework, fewer returns. If it's a product, right? Less rework, even less rework on even professional services, but even things like products, like fewer returns, because we've got a good QA process in place. Again, even if it's a report, right? If we do the right things, if we've got a consistent way that we write and review and approve the report before it goes to the client, then it doesn't have to come back through the process. So all of those types of things add up, and it can improve. And what we see is really the multiplier effect. So ideally in the short term, you get a bump in revenue, which is good for now. When you're selling your business, most of the valuations are going to be a multiplier of either revenue or typically a multiplier of EBITDA, right? How profitable the business is. So if you're more profitable, then that multiplier, the outcome is going to be better. But then the multiple itself gets better because now the buyer comes in and says, man, you've got a well-oiled machine. You've got written policies and procedures. You've got low return rate, whatever it is that they're looking at. And they go, the range of multiples varies greatly by industry and other things. You might get an initial multiple of, say, 6 to 9x on EBITDA for your industry. If you're doing all of the right things and the buyer values you, guess what? You're much more likely to get 9. So 9 times whatever is certainly better than 6 times whatever.
Yeah.
And if you do the work to improve the profitability, that whatever number is now higher. So now if you can get 9 times a much higher whatever, your value of the business is that much greater.
And it's, I think, interesting to note that's something that you have to think about ahead of time. You need to give this some thought, some consideration before you get to that point in which you are in a sale position or in a transaction already. I think at that point, as you mentioned earlier, your value of your business is what it is, and you don't have the opportunity to go back and improve the way that you're doing things or that valuation. It just, you don't have that time to do so. I'm particularly interested in understanding what it is that you think makes a first of all, an ideal client. So a company that you want to work with. And then ultimately, what is it that what are they thinking about in terms of selling? Is it 10 years down the road? Should I start now? Should I be engaging with people before I even start the company? What are your thoughts on when somebody like you should be engaged and what it is that can do upfront?
So the magic number that a lot of people will tell you in the broader exit M&A world is 10 years.
Okay.
And so I like to work backwards and people go, 10 years? Okay, so here's how it's going to work. When you sell, and part of this is up to negotiation, you can expect that you're going to work for the buyer probably minimum of 6 months. We see 1 to 2 years is pretty standard. And part of that is going to be earnouts as well. So an earnout is, hey, if you stick around and you're able to continue to improve profitability and drive revenue, there's going to be a higher additional payout when it's all said and done, right? And some owners are willing to do that. So let's just say 2 years, fairly standard. The transaction itself process, you'll hear some M&A people say, oh, we can get you complete and done in 6 months. It probably happens at times, but that's really optimistic. If people are being honest with you, 9 to 18 months is fairly standard because you got to go through the courting process. You got to find an M&A broker and somebody who's going to represent you, right? So you got to identify the people who are going to represent you. That takes time. They've got to get to know your business and put together the pretty little package that they're going to send out to potential people. You've got to interview. So buyer and seller are interviewing each other and you've got to down select who you want to work with. You got to get through due diligence and you got to get through the closing transaction. And so that can take many months. I tell people you need to plan 9 to 18 months. So we take at least a year, you're 3.5 years at that point. And then it's going to take you some time, as I said earlier, prior to all of that. I like to tell people a minimum of 2 years because making these changes, changing habits, doing the accountability, just fixing the problems in the business. Sometimes it's implementing new software. It's re-implementing existing software. It's adopting the software. There's just so many various things. Again, probably minimum of 2 years, but oftentimes 3, 4, 5 years. So now all of a sudden you start adding that up. If you said, hey, I'm 45 and I want to be out at 55, I want to take an early retirement. And I also clarify with people, what does it mean to be out, which is a whole other conversation. But if you want to be done, like final out the door, hand over the keys in 10 years, then you need to be working today. You need to start thinking about the process today. And unfortunately, what we see sometimes is that people show up at age 65 or 70 saying, okay, I'm ready to be done. Unfortunately, sometimes at their age, right? They're tired, they're ready to be out. They don't want to invest more time. And your ability to impact the value of the business is pretty minimal. You're going to be stuck with whatever it is.
Man, that is unfortunate. And I'm guessing pretty common amongst folks that just get to the point where I loved what I was doing up until this point, and I feel like I am now very tired and I do not want to have to do it anymore. I think that's a hard conversation to have, and it's a hard thing to start to plan for.
I think, as I said in the opening, the word exit, even when I say that word, some people's eyes go, what? Because in many ways, it really is planning your funeral. It's doing your personal estate planning. Okay. Again, we're going to die. So hopefully you've got a will and a trust and a living power of attorney and whatever those things are. Hopefully you've communicated to your family and friends, whether you're an organ donor, whether you want to be cremated, whatever that might be. And it can be a morbid conversation, right? It can be an uncomfortable conversation. And while we may not be talking cremation in the world of your business, but you're going to exit your business. Who's going to take over? And how is that going to happen? And hopefully I've had clients look at me and say, well, just find me dead at my desk one day. And I'm like, that's one way to go, but.
Yeah, I've heard some people say, you'll have to pry the computer out of my cold, dead hands. And I'm like, oh, okay, we'll talk about that, but I feel that same way next year.
That's the other thing that I think maybe I can end on here is the work that I do. We've talked about the ultimate exit, and hopefully the ultimate exit is just selling and that you've got time and money to go do something else. But that in itself is part of what this type of work can do. I like to talk about the options that come to business owners. And so those options can be, what if you could take a vacation and not take your laptop with you? right? Your significant other would probably love you that you didn't have to take your laptop with you, that you didn't have to call in every day and check on something, that you weren't the one logging in to approve or paying payroll or whatever that might be, right? That you could actually go to Europe for 2 weeks and spend time with your significant other, with your family, whatever that is, and really enjoy life. So that's one, but that comes from this same type of work, right? When you've got the policies, the procedures, the people in place, the decision authority in place, the tools in place, then the business runs and does what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't require you to do it. So it gives you that option. Another option sometimes is we have people who show up and say, I want to still be involved, but I'm not necessarily ready to retire. I don't necessarily want to sell, or I don't want to sell all of the business, right? Maybe they're looking for some type of, hey, I want to work part-time. I want to still be a part owner, whatever that might be. That means there's some type of transition, whether that's a leadership transition, whether that's an ownership transition. So that's the second type of optionality. And then the third optionality that I like to build with clients is, instead of showing up at 70, and I hate to say begging somebody to buy your business from you, what if you could show up at 60 or 65, or again, whatever your goal is, and you've built such a good business and it's profitable and it's attractive that maybe you have 2 or 3 or 4 buyers who are actually clamoring to buy your business. Now you're the one who's really driving the negotiations, right? So all of that optionality all throughout that timeline is part of what this work can give you.
I love that. I think it rings true in my brain as there's 2 things that everybody says are guaranteed in life, and it's death and taxes. And I think we probably should add that third one on there of company exit, right? You're eventually going to leave, whether you own it, whether you work there, you're eventually going to leave and be at a different organization or a different phase of your life, and planning for that exit early on and ahead of time would seem to make the most sense to me.
Yeah. And I've got a guy right now who's saying he's early 50s, similar age to me. And he's saying, I want to go enjoy the rest of my life. I don't want to keep doing this. I want to go spend time with my family and do other things. And so that's what we're trying to help him do.
The outcomes that you are able to help folks obtain are beyond words. It's helping folks move into the phase of their life in which they get to enjoy it. What better work could you be doing? That's phenomenal. For folks that really want to know more about you, more about your process, more about what your company does, how do they get a hold of you?
So the easiest is an email, robert@meetcorvata.com. You can go to the website at meetcorvata.com. Would love to have an initial conversation, see what your thoughts are. It truly is no pressure. It's figuring out where you are in the process and what we can help you do to achieve your goals.
We will get all of that info in the show notes so everybody has the opportunity to click a link and get directly connected with you. This conversation has been fantastic. I really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing some of your wisdom in company exit strategies. For everyone who is listening in, make sure that you reach out and follow Robert on LinkedIn. He's got great content and he's always putting out really helpful thought leadership that I personally really love. So thank you again, Robert, for being on the show.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone, for listening this week on GovCon Unscripted. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll see you next week. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Roberts. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.